Chapter 5. Outside the troll's house, Catherine and the old woman had indeed found something pleasant to talk about. Catherine was listening with rapt attention while the witch marveled at what a miracle it was that a maggot could turn into a fly, that an egg could turn into a bird, a tadpole to a frog, a seed to a flower. As we approached, I thought I heard the old woman say what a lesson it was that the maggot must die so that the fly may live. The girl agreed with Allison. The witch's name, it turned out, was Allison, and said that she had experienced firsthand a similar transubstantiation. Nehtaehkin introduced himself to Catherine and gallantly kissed her hand. He told her with prophetic directness that she would be the happy mother of my future son, and congratulated her, upon which her face turned as red as his hat. Catherine Laporte was finally shockable. He then lamented that we must away to York immediately, and that, unfortunately, our craft was only large enough for 3, and asked if she would mind being a guest in his humble home while Allison and I accompanied him to the city.
Perhaps the poor thing will be afraid, staying out here in the woods by herself,
objected the old woman. Nonsense, said Catherine. Her voice was changed, as if the place from which her words came had descended to the center of her soul. I have my stomach back and refuse to be afraid of anything. I will be quite comfortable here until you return. May I peruse your library? Of course you may, said the troll. There is a copy of Alfred's Saints which you may consider your own. Read it to your children. Catherine had resolved not to blush again. She tried to respond to the troll, but no words came. Finally, she smiled and impulsively kissed his head. The moment in which I was to take my leave of Catherine was the most awkward of my life. What does a boy say to a new acquaintance whom he has been prematurely fated to marry? Etiquette withers in such a circumstance. I went to her, stammered, blushed, and swallowed a mouthful of vomit that tried to escape my nervous stomach. The troll has spoken, she said quietly. It was true, I knew. I knew. It was true. Holding her hand, I saw her to the door, glanced into her moist yet hopeful eyes, and ran back to my 2 companions without saying a word and without looking back. Our journey back to York was frightening. Also, our speed and altitude were unbelievable. We clung to the witch's robe as we flew over the trees, and Nehtaehkin must have been equally nervous as he dug his nails into my shoulder for balance. I felt Allison's bony ribs through her black robe as I held on for life. Once, when I was afraid of falling, I grabbed her arm muscle. It was as hard as a pine knot.
Relax, boy, and enjoy the view,
she advised curtly. Both the troll and I eased somewhat when we were safely above the trees. Eventually, the trees looked like minuscule weeds, and the river shone below us in the moonlight like a long silver snake. I clutched her robe with all my strength as the landscape inched by below us. The corpses had vanished. In their stead were lily pads that glowed like floral lanterns illuminating our way. Within minutes, I could make out the cross shape of York Cathedral and the toy-like ships at the city's port. We touched ground an eighth of a mile outside the city square, a bit too rapidly. I limped around in a circle and made damnable faces.
There,
growled Allison, and we looked to where the old woman was pointing. In the city square, not far from where I had performed the play the day before, an incredible 2-story pile of wood had been assembled. On top of this unholy pile stood a large stake. We scrambled to cover and hid ourselves behind a small stone wall on a hill overlooking the square and waited. The sun was coming up. An old man hobbled into the square. Then came 2 women. Then the ecclesiastical assembly and a large, sleepy, yet eager crowd began to congregate around the potential pyre. A group of monks appeared, chanting Kyrie eleison, and behind them were 4 armored men, 2 on horseback. Their armor and the bright red banners looked familiar. These 4 were the same knights who had charged me with witchcraft the day before and tried to arrest me. The tallest one, in gait and bearing apparently their leader, grasped an iron chain that attached to a wide band around my mentor's neck. Robert, fatigued with torture and exhaustion, managed to stumble along as the knight tugged his chain and spoke harshly to him. We could not hear what the knight was saying. The troll puffed through his snout indignantly as we watched from a distance. He turned to me, patted my back roughly, and said, "I will be right back." Then he scampered quickly toward the city square. Allison and I watched the troll unbutton his pants, run around the mound, and empty his seemingly inexhaustible bladder around the circumference of the fuel pile. A couple of young boys noticed his swift maneuver, stared and pointed, but their parents ignored them. Nehtaehkin sprinted back up the hill, dove over the wall, spun around on his back thrice, and laughed. 2 knights dragged Robert by the neck to the top of the wood pile and tied him securely to the stake. A fat-bellied bishop stood beside him and prayed long prayers too soft to hear. He was evidently giving Robert a chance to confess his sins and renounce the devil. But Robert was adamant regarding his innocence. The 2 other knights lit their torches and touched them to the foot of the pyre at opposite ends. Nothing happened. They marched around the mound of wood, bringing their torches down in a vain attempt to ignite an inferno, but to no effect. And then Robert abused them all with filthy language, and I caught the phrase, "ignorant bishop, son and heir of a mongrel bitch with a wet turd for a heart." They tried repeatedly, but no matter what they did, they could not succeed in lighting their evil fire. Nehtaehkin laughed and whispered in my ear, "Troll pish, highly inflammable." The bishop spoke briefly to a priest who spoke at length to the 4 knights. Within half an hour, a group of men rolled a makeshift gallows to the center of the city square. The 2 knights again climbed the woodpile, untied the priest from the stake, placed a noose around his neck, and pulled him brutally until he fell and rolled down onto the street. Allison stood up chagrined and hurled a large rock at one of the knights. It penetrated his helmet and knocked him senseless to the ground. The 2 knights on horseback careened with swords drawn toward the direction from whence the rock had been thrown. "We are finished," I said. "They see us." "Fear not," said the troll. As the first knight ascended our vantage point, Nehtaehkin turned the man's muscular black steed into a large pig, who turned around many times and foamed at the mouth. The dizzy knight kicked his spurs into the pig's ribs, and the snorting beast galloped back down the hill and crashed through the front door of an inn, sending a group of elegant ladies screaming into the street. The second knight charged the troll with his sword drawn, ready to strike, but Nehtaehkin changed his sword to a snake. The man fell backwards from his horse, threw the snake skyward, and landed on his head. Before he could regain his balance, the troll spat upon him, turning his entire suit of armor into rust. The blackguard fell over, frozen in an attitude of running. The troll kicked open his visor and looked intently into the face of the man. Nehtaehkin had little time to savor this military victory. "They've taken Robert to the gallows!" I yelled. "They're going to hang him!" Robert stood on the gallows with a black bag over his head and a noose around his neck. The bishop stood beside him, repeating his banal prayer. "Stay here!" the troll barked, but I did not obey. I ran after him down the hill as he rushed toward the impending execution. Toward the bottom of the hill, someone tackled me. I struggled and kicked until I recognized his large, toothless face. "Let go of me!" I yelled. "I'm trying to save Robert." "So am I," John Sampson rejoined. "Stay out of harm's way." "What-ho!" screamed the final knight as the troll leapt upon him furiously. Nehtaehkin grabbed the man's sword and stabbed his face through the slot in his visor, sending him to his death from the side of the gallows. The troll climbed to the top and severed the rope with his tusks, sending Robert off balance to his knees. "Behold the power of Satan!" shouted the bishop, unaware of the commotion behind him. "Yes, I am the power of Satan," screamed the troll. "And if it were not for this child of God, Robert of Blackpool, I would have eaten all your index fingers." The bishop fainted, and the crowd dispersed in panic, like a noisy flock of geese. "Nettie, you fool!" said the priest. "Get out of here!" "Run to your homes!" shrieked the troll. "Escape now, or your index fingers will be mine!" Unfortunately, this victory was also short-lived. My friend John Sampson shot the troll with his crossbow and pierced him through the neck. Nehtaehkin flipped over from the gallows and landed in the streets. This rekindled the courage of a few men. They were on him instantly and hacked off his head. I ran wailing through the insane rabble. By the time I arrived, they had his head aloft on a pike. "Tell the mother of your future child not to mourn for me," implored the head of Nehtaehkin from the top of the pike. They silenced him by setting the head on fire. Then they dragged the rest of his body to the city square and burned it also. I watched in shock as England's last remaining full-blooded troll, together with the last mortal relic of Saint Joseph of Arimathea, disintegrated into ashes. I do not remember when Robert of Blackpool picked me up and ran with me, but I vaguely recall that in his other arm he carried Alison. He brought the two of us to safety at the docks, gently laid our catatonic frames into our original 3-person boat, and suddenly the sky began to spin, and once again I lost consciousness. And thus our extraordinary adventure came to its melancholy conclusion. Time, goes the common wisdom, heals all wounds. And it is partly true. Much can happen in 40 years to carry a man away from his past, though our history prevails only slightly faded at our innermost center, glows faint and yet unvanquished within us all. The years between 1375 and 1415 have been extraordinary, and history, despite my conservative protestations, has continued. King Edward, as the troll predicted, left France to invade Scotland, but died a year later. Richard II, as everyone knows, kept the kingdom in turmoil and made a tragic and untimely end. Henry IV fought his entire life to keep his country together, and now that his foolhardy son is king, our patriotic energies have turned again with idiotic impudence to France. The last I heard, the king's troops have invaded Harfleur. It seems so barbaric and futile, the quest for temporal and external victory. What can it bring us? but the emptiness of cynical competition, which in turn breeds grief upon grief. What did we gain by our violence against the powers of York, but bitter defeat and emotional scars to be healed only by the joys of heaven? And yet not so. I chide myself upon reflection, for much good was accomplished in our 2½ weeks of adventure, and when I honestly think of the impact that that short time has had on my life, my mind must promptly surrender. The most significant skirmishes, I learned that year, rage within our own hearts. This knowledge was instrumental in my giving up the world and becoming a priest. I have been happy these many years as a priest. Father Blackpool, who is 87, still only somewhat infirm, though blind and more ascetic than ever, continually chides me that I am too otherworldly, and so I have to watch myself. The two of us this week made our first excursion back to York since I was a boy. The cathedral is very near completion, though the south transept suffers from a suspicious paucity of gargoyles. We looked for news regarding Allison at the former home of John and Marjorie Sampson, but of course, she was long gone. My two hosts had generously given the old woman their house when they left York a week after my recovery. The couple who live there now are too young to remember Allison, but they have heard stories of an eccentric old woman who lived there and kept to herself. One day, many years ago, she disappeared, and no one ever saw her again. John and Marjorie Sampson, of course, never learned the entire story of the troll. John was too soft-hearted to be told the truth. He grieved enough over the troll when he thought he was our enemy. Neither of them could escape the story of St. Joseph's finger, however, and when I was sufficiently recovered from my trauma, they gave away all their possessions and went on a holy quest for the Grail of Christ. They searched for the Grail all their lives, and from what I've been told, were successful in recovering a few clues. They are buried in a cemetery outside of Glastonbury. Yesterday, Robert and I returned to the York City Square. It looked almost unchanged from 40 years ago. So much of my history sprang from that very spot. It was there that I played the shrew in the Noah play. It was there that Nehtaehkin gave his life for Robert of Blackpool. There that Robert eventually told me of his trip to Carlisle and his first encounter with the troll. How some soldiers on horseback had carelessly run over Nehtaehkin at the fork in the road, and how Robert, newly returned from Calais, took care of the troll and nursed him back to health and decided never to wear armor again. I remember standing on that very spot in the city square and having it burst upon me that the troll had foreseen his own end when I walked through his door and had planned everything accordingly, sending Robert to Carlisle to pour his blood as a memorial of their first meeting, and as a sign that that meeting had sealed both their fates. It was in that city square that I felt an active and determined life force deep within my womb, and I knew that the troll had impregnated me. On that spot, I became aware that my human frame now successfully and permanently embodied both sexes, and that I was to exemplify St. Paul's claim that in Christ there is neither male nor female. I long to return to Catherine, my wife, and Nathan, my son, and also our two other sons. We've enjoyed great success in keeping my vocation from her family and our marriage from church authorities. As a result, we are very wealthy and spend much of our time in a noteworthy house between the towns of Blackpool and Southport, now two of the wealthiest parishes in northwest England. Through Catherine's undisputed authority in ancient Greek, we have preserved and copied some invaluable books. My son Nathan is also a priest. The three of us run a rather odd and sporadic ministry. Robert is the oldest and crankiest priest in Yorkshire. I am the most sexually unique. And Nathan is the only priest who is secretly half troll. I love all my sons equally, but Nathan is the eldest, ugliest, and noblest of them. Tomorrow, I will return to be with my family. For comfort, I will sit at my desk and touch my ancient copy of Alfric's Saints. I will open it carefully to the page where the knife stopped, to the third page of the 36th chapter, My Name's Sake, and read the heading, Saint Thomas the Apostle. Then I will look at the sentence upon which the knife landed and read it. Then said the holy apostle, the Savior hath builded unnumbered dwellings and spacious palaces from the beginning of the world, magnificently in heaven, and they can be purchased with true faith. Nehtaehkin, my friend, the other father of my son, someday I will see you there. Catherine, my dear wife, tomorrow I will be home.